The thunder of hooves and gunshots echoed across the prairie as Abram Montgomery raced toward his homestead, his heart pounding with the fury of 1,000 wild horses. Smoke billowed in the distance, smoke from his cabin. His boys were there, alone with only their elderly neighbor watching over them, and the fear that gripped him was unlike any he had ever known on the battlefield or facing down outlaws. It was 1872. Just outside Abilene, Kansas, and life on the frontier had been unforgiving for the widowed father of 2 young boys. 3 years had passed since consumption had taken his Sarah, leaving him alone to raise their sons, William and James, aged 7 and 5. As Abram approached the homestead, relief washed over him. The smoke was merely coming from the chimney, not from a burning cabin. He dismounted his chestnut stallion, patting the horse's sweaty neck. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured, tying the reins to the hitching post. His weathered face, tanned from years under the Kansas sun, relaxed only slightly. The boys should have been outside doing their chores, but the yard was empty. The quiet made him uneasy. Too many years as a deputy in Abilene had taught him to be wary of silence. "William, James." Abram called, his deep voice carrying across the yard. When no response came, he quickened his pace toward the cabin door, his spurs jingling with each step. As he pushed open the door, he heard hushed whispers and small, hurried footsteps. "Inside, Mrs." Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had been watching the boys, was seated in a rocking chair by the fire, a knowing smile on her face. "They heard you coming," she said, nodding toward Abram's legs. "Been jittery since that wagon pulled up." Abram felt small hands clutching at the back of his trousers and tiny bodies pressing against his legs. He looked down to see his sons hiding behind him, peeking around at something or someone in the cabin. That's when he noticed her. Standing near the kitchen table was a woman he had never seen before. Slender but strong-looking, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, though rebellious tendrils had escaped to frame her face. Her deep blue dress was simple but clean, and her hands held a cloth-covered basket. "Mr. Montgomery," Mrs. Patterson said, "this here is Miss Violet Campbell. She's the new schoolteacher for Abilene." Abram studied the woman cautiously. New faces in these parts often meant trouble, and he had learned the hard way not to trust easily. Yet there was something about her open expression that gave him pause. Violet smiled, and Abram noticed the small freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice melodic and warm. "I've been visiting all the families with children of school age." She gestured to the basket. "I brought cookies." At those magic words, Abram felt the grip on his legs loosen slightly. He glanced down to see his boys' eyes widening with interest, though they maintained their position behind him. "Cookies?" little James whispered, his voice barely audible. Violet knelt down, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Yes, indeed, molasses cookies, my mother's recipe." She pulled back the cloth to reveal a batch of perfectly round, dark brown cookies. "They're still warm." William, always the more cautious of the two, remained firmly planted behind Abram, but James took a hesitant step to the side, curiosity overcoming his shyness. "I don't think we've met, Mr. Montgomery," Violet said, standing up again and extending her hand. "I arrived in Abilene just last week. The town council was kind enough to offer me the teaching position." Abram took her hand briefly, noting its warmth and surprising strength. "Madam," he said with a nod, "welcome to Abilene." His words were courteous, but his tone remained reserved. "Your boys have been quite shy," Mrs. Patterson said, rising slowly from the rocking chair. "But Miss Campbell has been patient." Violet smiled down at the 2 small faces peering around their father's legs. "I understand being careful around strangers. That's very wise." She set the basket on the table. "Perhaps after you've had a cookie, we won't be strangers anymore." James, unable to resist any longer, emerged fully from behind Abram and approached the table with cautious steps. William remained firmly attached to his father, his small fingers digging into the rough fabric of Abram's trousers. "Go on, Will," Abram said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his older son's shoulder. "It's all right." William shook his head, his eyes never leaving the stranger. Violet didn't press. Instead, she handed a cookie to James, whose eyes grew wide with delight as he took his first bite. "These are better than Mrs. Patterson's," he exclaimed, then immediately looked guilty at the elderly woman. Mrs. Patterson merely chuckled. "He's right about that." "I never did have the knack for baking." Abram smiled despite himself. It had been so long since he'd seen such simple joy on his son's face. After Sarah's death, laughter had been scarce in their household. "Miss Campbell was just telling me about her plans for the schoolhouse, Mrs. Patterson said, gathering her shawl. "Seems she's full of new ideas." Violet nodded, her expression brightening. "The school building needs some work, but with a little effort, I believe we can make it a wonderful place of learning. I was hoping to recruit some help from the community for repairs." "Papa can help," James said through a mouthful of cookie. "He can fix anything?" Abram felt a flush of embarrassment. "James, don't speak with your mouth full." Violet laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to warm the room. "Well, I would certainly welcome any assistance, Mr. Montgomery. I understand you were a deputy in town." "Still am when they need me," Abram replied. "But mostly I tend to this place now." He didn't mention that he'd stepped back from full-time law work after Sarah died, needing to be there for his boys. Mrs. Patterson moved toward the door. "I should be getting back. My Herbert will be wondering where his supper is." She patted Violet's arm. "You'll do just fine here, dear. This town needs someone like you." After the elderly woman left, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. William finally ventured out from behind Abram's legs but stayed close to his side. "Would you like a cookie, William?" Violet asked softly, offering the basket. The boy looked up at his father, seeking permission. When Abram nodded, William carefully took a cookie, nibbling it cautiously. "Thank you, Miss Campbell," Abram said, his voice gruff. "But we don't want to keep you. I'm sure you have other families to visit." A flicker of something disappointment crossed Violet's face, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Of course, I've taken enough of your time." She placed the cloth back over the remaining cookies and left the basket on the table. Perhaps the boys would enjoy the rest later. As she gathered her things, Abram noticed details he'd missed in his initial assessment: the small ink stain on her right index finger, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the worn leather of her otherwise well-kept boots. She wasn't some city girl playing at frontier life. There was substance to her. "School begins next Monday," she said, moving toward the door. "I hope to see both your boys there, Mr. Montgomery." William, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Will you bring more cookies?" Violet's face lit up with a smile that reached her eyes, crinkling their corners. "I suppose I might be persuaded to bring treats for special occasions." "We'll be there," Abram found himself saying, surprising even himself with the commitment. The boys hadn't attended school regularly since Sarah's passing. As Violet stepped onto the porch, she turned back. "It was a pleasure meeting you all, truly." Her gaze met Abram's, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared loneliness. Then she was gone, the sound of her wagon fading into the distance. James looked up at his father, his small face serious. "I like her, Papa." Abram ruffled his son's hair, his eyes still on the horizon where Violet's wagon had disappeared. "She seems nice enough." But as he closed the door, he couldn't deny the strange feeling that their quiet, insulated world had just been irrevocably changed by a basket of cookies and a woman with kind eyes. The weekend passed in a blur of chores and preparations. Abram found himself taking extra care to ensure the boys' clothes were clean and mended for their first day of school. He even trimmed their hair on Sunday afternoon, something he usually only did when it grew long enough to cover their eyes. "Why are you fussing so much, Papa?" William asked as Abram dampened and combed his unruly brown locks. "Don't you want to make a good impression on your new teacher?" Abram replied, concentrating on making the cut even. Is it because she's pretty? James piped up from where he sat waiting his turn. Abram's hands stilled for a moment. It's because education is important, he said firmly, resuming his task. Your mama would want you both to be learned men someday. The mention of their mother sobered the boys, as it always did. Sarah had been a schoolteacher herself before marrying Abram and moving west. Her books still lined the small shelf in the corner of their cabin, dog-eared volumes of Shakespeare, Dickens, and various texts on mathematics and science. She had been determined that her sons would be educated, frontier life notwithstanding. Monday morning arrived with golden sunlight and a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Abram rose early, lighting the stove and preparing a hearty breakfast of oatmeal and the last of the previous autumn's preserved apples. The boys were unusually quiet as they ate, both excited and nervous about the day ahead. Now remember, Abram said as he helped James button his shirt, you mind Miss Campbell and do as she says. Will you come with us, Papa? William asked, his eyes betraying his anxiety. Abram hesitated. He had planned to drop them off and then head to the north pasture where the fence needed mending, but the pleading look in his son's eyes changed his mind. I'll take you in and make sure you're settled, he conceded. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a modest wooden building that had seen better days. As they approached, Abram noticed several improvements had already been made. The steps had been repaired, the windows cleaned, and a fresh coat of whitewash applied to the exterior. Children of various ages were filing in, some accompanied by parents, others arriving on their own. Abram helped his sons down from the wagon and led them toward the entrance, feeling their small hands gripping his tightly. Inside, the transformation was even more apparent. The previously dusty and neglected interior was now clean and organized. Rows of desks faced a large chalkboard, and colorful maps adorned the walls. At the front of the room, arranging books on her desk, was Violet Campbell. She looked up as they entered, and her face brightened. Good morning, Mr. Montgomery, she called. Then, bending slightly to address the boys directly, she added, and good morning to you, William and James. I'm so pleased you've come. William retreated partially behind Abram's leg again, but James offered a shy, good morning, Miss Campbell. Violet gestured to two desks in the second row. I've saved spots for you both. And look, she reached into her desk drawer and produced a small jar. I brought peppermint sticks for everyone on this first day. James's eyes widened with delight, but he looked to his father for permission before accepting the sweet. Abram nodded, and both boys tentatively took their seats, though William kept glancing back at his father anxiously. They'll be fine, Violet said softly, stepping closer to Abram. I promise to take good care of them. Up close, Abram noticed the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes and the way her hair, pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, caught the morning light. She smelled faintly of lavender and soap, a clean, feminine scent that made him suddenly conscious of his own appearance. I appreciate that, he said, adjusting his hat nervously. They haven't been around many people since their mother passed. A shadow of sympathy crossed Violet's face. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you were widowed. I'm very sorry for your loss. 3 years now, Abram said, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. He rarely spoke of Sarah to strangers. Consumption. Violet nodded, understanding in her eyes. My father was taken by the same illness when I was 16. It's a terrible thing to witness. This shared experience, this common pain, created an unexpected connection between them. Abram found himself wanting to ask her more about her family, her journey to Abilene, her life before becoming a teacher here. But the schoolroom was filling with children and parents were beginning to leave. I should go, he said reluctantly. Boys, mind what Miss Campbell teaches you. I'll be back to fetch you when school lets out. William looked panicked for a moment. Promise you'll come back. The fear in his son's voice pierced Abram's heart. Since losing their mother, William had developed an intense fear of abandonment, often becoming anxious when Abram was out of sight. "I promise," Abram said firmly, meeting his son's gaze. "I have never broken a promise to you, have I?" William shook his head, somewhat reassured. Violet approached and knelt beside William's desk. "Your father is a man of his word, William, and while you're here with me, we're going to learn so many interesting things that the time will fly by. Before you know it, he'll be back." The boy didn't look entirely convinced, but he gave a small nod. As Abram turned to leave, Violet walked him to the door. "Mr. Montgomery," she said quietly, "there's a school board meeting this Friday evening. We'll be discussing repairs and improvements to the schoolhouse. Your input would be valuable, considering your boys will be attending." "I'm not much for meetings, Miss Campbell. Please consider it," she pressed gently. "I could use an ally who understands practical matters. Some of the board members have impractical expectations of what can be accomplished with our limited resources." There was something in her direct gaze that made it difficult to refuse. "I'll think on it," he conceded. As he rode away, Abram found himself looking back at the schoolhouse more than once. The thought of his boys inside, learning from Miss Campbell, filled him with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Education had been Sarah's domain. She would have known exactly how to support their schooling. He felt woefully inadequate in comparison. Yet there was also a strange lightness in his chest, the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years. It took him several miles of riding fence line to recognize it for what it was: anticipation. For the first time in 3 long years, he was looking forward to something more than just surviving another day. The first week of school transformed the Montgomery household. Each evening, the boys returned home full of stories about their day, the history lesson Miss Campbell had taught, the arithmetic problems they'd solved, the books she'd read aloud. Even William, typically reserved and quiet, bubbled with excitement about learning to write in cursive. "Miss Campbell says I have a natural talent for penmanship," he told Abram proudly over supper on Thursday evening. "She let me write the date on the chalkboard today. And she showed us a real telescope," James added, milk dribbling down his chin in his enthusiasm. "She says on clear nights you can see the craters on the moon." Abram listened to their chatter with a growing sense of gratitude. The boys seemed happier, more engaged with the world around them. He hadn't realized how much they'd needed something beyond the confines of their small homestead, how much they'd craved intellectual stimulation and the guidance of a caring teacher. On Friday afternoon, as he approached the schoolhouse to collect his sons, Abram made a decision. He would attend the school board meeting that evening. It was the least he could do to support the woman who had brought such positive change to his boys' lives in just 1 short week. The meeting was held in the town hall, a modest building that served multiple functions in Abilene. Abram arrived a few minutes early, having left the boys with Mrs. Patterson. He felt out of place among the more affluent citizens who comprised the school board: the banker, the mayor, the general store owner, and 2 of the town's wealthiest ranchers. Violet arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a high-necked dress of forest green that complemented her auburn hair. Her face lit up when she saw Abram, and she quickly made her way to his side. "You came," she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "Seemed the right thing to do," Abram replied, suddenly conscious of his well-worn clothing and scuffed boots. The meeting began with formalities and reports on enrollment numbers and budget matters. Violet presented a detailed plan for necessary repairs to the schoolhouse, including a new roof before winter, additional windows to improve lighting, and bookshelves for a small library. "These improvements will require funding beyond our current allocation," Mayor Jenkins pointed out, his tone suggesting he found the requests excessive. "And labor," added Mr. Thornton, the banker. "Skilled labor costs money, Miss Campbell." Violet stood her ground. "The children of Abilene deserve a safe, well-equipped place to learn. Many of these repairs are not luxuries but necessities. Perhaps we could organize volunteers," Abram found himself saying, drawing all eyes to him. Many folks around here have skills they'd be willing to contribute for the sake of the children. Violet gave him a grateful look. Mr. Montgomery raises an excellent point. With donated materials and volunteer labor, we could significantly reduce costs. And who would organize such an effort? The mayor asked skeptically. I would, Abram said, surprising himself as much as everyone else in the room, with Miss Campbell's guidance on what's needed. The discussion continued for another hour, with Violet advocating passionately for her students and Abram supporting her practical suggestions. By the end, the board had approved a modest budget increase and agreed to Abram's volunteer plan. As the meeting dispersed, Violet touched Abram's arm lightly. Thank you, she said, her voice warm with sincerity. You didn't have to do that. My boys spend their days in that schoolhouse now, he replied simply. I want it to be sound. They walked outside together into the cool evening air. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the main street of Abilene was quiet, most businesses having closed for the night. May I walk you home? Abram asked, the words coming out before he had fully considered them. Violet hesitated only briefly. That would be kind, thank you. I'm staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house just past the church. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before Violet spoke again. Your boys are remarkable, Mr. Montgomery. You've done a fine job raising them on your own. They're good boys, Abram agreed, but I worry. Since their mother died, I haven't been able to give them everything they need, especially William. He's so afraid of being left alone. Loss changes us, Violet said softly. Children perhaps most of all, but they're resilient and they clearly adore you. Sarah was the one who read to them, taught them their letters, Abram confessed. I know my way around cattle and crops, guns and horses, but books. He trailed off, embarrassment coloring his words. You give them security and love, Violet replied firmly. That's the foundation they need. The rest can be built upon it. As they reached the boarding house, Abram removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Will you be at the church social tomorrow? He asked, trying to sound casual. I plan to attend, yes. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Will you be bringing your boys? I thought they might enjoy it. He cleared his throat. And perhaps you might save a dance for me. In the lamplight from the boarding house porch, he could see a blush rise to her cheeks. I'd like that very much, Mr. Montgomery. Abram, he said. My name is Abram. Abram, she repeated, the sound of his name on her lips sending an unexpected warmth through him. Then you must call me Violet, he nodded, settling his hat back on his head. Good night, Violet. Good night, Abram, as he walked back to collect his sons from Mrs. Patterson's. Abram's step was lighter than it had been in years. The weight of loneliness that had become so familiar, he scarcely noticed it any more seemed, if not lifted, than at least shared somehow. The church social the next evening was a lively affair. Tables laden with food lined one side of the church hall, and a small band of local musicians played cheerful tunes in the corner. Children ran about playing games while adults mingled, catching up on news and gossip. Abram had taken particular care with his appearance, wearing his good shirt and polished boots. He'd even trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair with pomade borrowed from a neighbor. The boys, too, were freshly scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best. They spotted Violet immediately. She stood near the punch bowl, wearing a dress of pale blue that made her look younger, more carefree than her schoolteacher attire. Her hair was arranged differently, too partially down with soft curls framing her face. Miss Campbell. James called out, breaking free from Abram's grip and rushing toward her. Violet turned at the sound, her face lighting up. James, William, how handsome you both look tonight. Her eyes moved to Abram and her smile deepened. And you as well, Mr. Abram. He felt an unfamiliar flush of pleasure at the compliment. You look very nice yourself, he managed, the words feeling inadequate to express how truly lovely she appeared. Mrs. Patterson appeared, offering to take the boys to play with the other children. "You young folks should enjoy the dancing," she said with a knowing smile that made Abram uncomfortable with its implication. Once the boys were occupied with games, an awkward silence fell between Abram and Violet. It had been so long since he'd engaged in social conversation with a woman that he found himself at a loss for words. Violet saved him by gesturing to the food table. "Shall we get something to eat? I've heard Mrs. Johnson's apple pie is legendary." They filled plates and found a quiet corner to sit and talk. Abram learned that Violet had come to Kansas from Pennsylvania after the death of her mother earlier that year. "There was nothing keeping me there," she explained, "and I'd always wanted to see the frontier. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Abilene, it seemed like fate." "It's a hard life out here," Abram said. "Different from back east," Violet nodded. "I'm discovering that, but there's an honesty to it that I find refreshing. People here depend on each other in ways they don't in more settled places." "Is that why you were so set on improving the schoolhouse, building community?" "Partly," she admitted, "but mostly because education is the great equalizer. Every child deserves the chance to learn, to better themselves regardless of their circumstances or background." Her passion reminded him painfully of Sarah, who had expressed similar sentiments. Yet there was something distinctly different about Violet, a pragmatic determination that complemented her idealism. The band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to form for dancing. Abram hesitated, but Violet gave him an encouraging smile. "I believe you promised me a dance," she said, setting aside her empty plate. "It's been a long while," he warned. "I might step on your toes." "I'll risk it," she replied with a twinkle in her eye. They joined the other dancers, and Abram awkwardly placed his hand at Violet's waist, taking her other hand in his. The contact, innocent as it was, sent a jolt through him. How long had it been since he'd touched a woman? Since he'd allowed himself to notice the softness of feminine skin, the delicate structure of a wrist, the warmth of another's proximity. His initial stiffness gradually melted away as they moved together. Violet was an excellent dancer, making it easy to follow her subtle cues. By the end of the first song, he was actually enjoying himself. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times. Between dances, they checked on the boys, who were thoroughly engrossed in games with the other children. William had even made a new friend, the blacksmith's son, a quiet boy his same age. "Will you be starting the repairs on the schoolhouse soon?" Violet asked as they took a break from dancing, sipping cool punch. "Next Saturday," Abram confirmed. "I've already spoken to several men who are willing to help. The miller has offered lumber at cost, and the blacksmith will donate hardware." "That's wonderful. I can't thank you enough for organizing this." "It's nothing," he said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "The community should support its school." The evening wound down, and as families began to leave, Abram collected his sleepy boys. William was so exhausted he could barely keep his eyes open, so Abram lifted him into his arms. "We should be getting home," he told Violet, who had helped James put on his jacket. "The boys have had a big night." "Of course," she said, smoothing James's unruly hair. "I've had a wonderful time." "As have I," Abram replied, meaning it sincerely. "Perhaps. Perhaps you would join us for Sunday dinner tomorrow, after church? Nothing fancy, but the boys would be pleased." The invitation surprised them both, but Violet's face glowed with pleasure. "I'd be delighted, thank you." That night, as Abram tucked his sons into bed, James asked drowsily, "Do you like Miss Campbell, Papa?" The question caught him off guard. "She's a fine teacher," he answered carefully. "But do you like her?" the boy persisted. "The way you liked Mama." Abram sat on the edge of the bed, considering how to respond. "Your mama was special, James. No one could ever replace her." "I know that," James said matter-of-factly, "but Miss Campbell makes you smile. You didn't smile much before." From the other bed, William spoke up unexpectedly. "Mama would want you to be happy, Papa. She told me so." Abram's throat tightened with emotion. "When did she tell you that?" "Before she went to heaven," William said solemnly. She said to take care of you and James and to help you be happy again someday. Tears pricked at Abram's eyes. He had never known of this final conversation between his wife and eldest son. "Your mama was very wise," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "So you can like Miss Campbell," James concluded, logic simple and direct. "It's all right." Abram kissed both boys goodnight, his heart full and confused. As he sat alone by the fire afterward, he confronted feelings he had buried for 3 years: grief, yes, but also loneliness. And now this unexpected spark of attraction and connection to Violet Campbell. Was it disloyal to Sarah's memory to feel this way? Or, as William suggested, would she have wanted him to find happiness again? The repairs to the schoolhouse became a community affair. Every Saturday for a month, men from Abilene and the surrounding farms gathered to work, while women provided food and children helped with smaller tasks. Violet was always there, rolling up her sleeves to paint or varnish alongside everyone else. Abram found himself looking forward to these workdays, to the moments when he and Violet would talk as they worked side by side. She told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her dreams of traveling west since she was a girl, her love of teaching. He shared stories of his early days as a deputy, his struggles and joys in raising the boys, even precious memories of Sarah that he had kept locked away. Sunday dinners at the Montgomery homestead became a regular occurrence. Violet taught the boys to bake cookies, the same molasses ones that had first won them over, and brought books to read aloud after the meal. She never tried to take Sarah's place, but created her own unique relationship with William and James, who blossomed under her attention. As autumn progressed, Abram realized his feelings for Violet had deepened into something he could no longer ignore or deny. She had brought light and laughter back into their home, had seen his boys not just as students but as the remarkable individuals they were, had valued his opinions and respected his grieving process, without pushing or pulling him in directions he wasn't ready to go. One crisp October evening, after the boys were asleep, Abram and Violet sat on the porch swing, a quilt shared between them against the growing chill. "The schoolhouse looks fine now," Abram said, gazing at the stars. "Roof solid, windows tight, should be warm enough for winter." "Thanks to you," Violet replied. "Your leadership made it happen." He shook his head. "It was your vision, I just provided the hands." They fell into a comfortable silence, the creak of the swing and the distant hooting of an owl the only sounds. Finally, Abram gathered his courage. "Violet," he began, his heart pounding, "these past months they've changed me, changed us, the boys and me." She turned to look at him, her expression open and warm in the lamplight spilling from the window. "Before you came, we were just existing, getting through each day." He struggled to find the right words. "But now there's more. There's laughter in this house again. There's learning and growing and hope." "I feel it too," she said softly. "When I came to Abilene, I was running away from loss, from emptiness after my mother died. I didn't expect to find a family." The word hung between them, full of meaning. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Abram confessed. "After Sarah, I believed that part of me was gone forever, but you've awakened something I thought was dead." He took her hand, marveling at how right it felt in his. "I'm not asking for any promises right now. It might be too soon, and there are the boys to consider. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are true and deep." Violet's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Abram," she whispered, "from the moment your sons peeked out from behind your legs, something told me I had found where I belonged. I've grown to care for all of you more than I ever thought possible." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Abram leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, a question more than a demand. When Violet responded, sliding her hand to his cheek, the last walls around his heart crumbled. As winter settled over Kansas, the Montgomery cabin was transformed. Violet spent more and more time there, helping with homework, sharing meals, bringing books and ideas and feminine touches that had been missing for too long. The boys thrived under the combined attention of their father and the woman who had become so important to all of them. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Abram presented Violet with a small box after the boys had gone to bed. "It's not much," he said nervously as she unwrapped it. Inside was a simple silver ring with a small pearl. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Sarah always said it should go to our daughter someday," but he took a deep breath. "Violet Campbell, I love you. The boys love you. Would you do us the honor of becoming a permanent part of our family? Of being my wife?" Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Their wedding was held in the newly renovated schoolhouse on a bright January day in 1873. William proudly served as best man, standing tall beside his father, while James scattered wildflowers grown in Mrs. Patterson's greenhouse along the aisle before Violet walked down it. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union of their schoolteacher and the quiet rancher who had found love again. Even the mayor, who had initially been skeptical of Violet's plans for the school, gave a touching toast at the reception. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "And to the power of cookies to win hearts." Laughter rippled through the crowd as Violet blushed and Abram squeezed her hand. Later, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Violet whispered, "I never imagined when I came to this town with my basket of cookies that I would find such happiness." "Nor I," Abram replied, holding her close. "But I'm grateful every day that you persisted when my boys hid behind my legs." "The cookies were just the beginning," Violet said with a smile. "It was your hearts I was after all along." In the years that followed, the Montgomery family flourished. Violet continued teaching, eventually opening a larger school as Abilene grew. Abram balanced ranching with occasional deputy work, proud to support his wife's educational mission. William and James excelled in their studies, the oldest eventually attending college back east, something Sarah had dreamed of but never dared hope for. And in the spring of 1874, the family welcomed twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Sarah, who grew up hearing the story of how their family came to be. How a basket of cookies, a widower's wounded heart, and two shy boys hiding behind their father's legs had been the beginning of a love that transformed them all. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, as they sat on that same porch swing watching their children play in the yard, Abram turned to Violet with the same wonder he had felt the first day she walked into their lives. "I never thought I could be this happy again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Violet leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Neither did I, but that's the miracle of love, it finds us even when we're hiding from it." And as the Kansas sun set on their homestead, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Abram Montgomery knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man in all of Abilene, all because a determined schoolteacher had once said the magic words, "I brought cookies."